Okay. Let's see. Welcome everybody to the online meetup on Holacracy and freedom. My name is Koen Bunders. I'm one of the partners at Energized.org, and our purpose is to unlock power for purpose. We strongly believe in self-organization and believe Holacracy is one of the most powerful tool sets for working in and on the organization. Our special guest today is Joris Janssen, and I'll ask him to introduce himself in a minute. But first, a few comments. First, the session is recorded, and our intention is to publish the recording later so that others can watch this too. So if you really do not want to have your face in the recording, you might want to turn off your video. But we highly welcome you to keep your video on. It will keep us engaged, so to speak. Second, we are with many people are dropping in. So if you haven't already, I'm going to ask you to mute your microphone. And we would love to see your faces. We already received many questions from our audience, and we like to make space for even more. So if you have questions during the session, please raise your hand in the Zoom app. That way we can see that there's a question. All right, let's dive in. Joris, we know each other as we have worked together implementing Holacracy at your organization, Luscii. Could you please introduce yourself and maybe your organization to the audience?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Koen. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here and to share some of our experiences and lessons. My name is Joris. I'm one of the co-founders of Luscii. We founded Luscii about 4 years ago now as a company that creates software for hospitals to enable remote patient monitoring. And our purpose is to create space for care for the nurses to focus on the patients that need them the most. We're with about 50 people now, and yeah, my original, let's say, roles were mostly focused on engineering. I have a technical background, and at some point I also became, the manager of the engineering team, and I realized that I didn't really want to be a manager. So I told the team at that point, it was a group of 20 people, look, we can either find you another manager or we can try to do things differently. And that's when we basically start trying out Holacracy, and Koen and Energized helped us to implement that. That was now 4 years ago. And in the meantime, we've learned a lot and we've made a lot of changes. And yeah, I'm happy to go through some of those things today.
Cool, wonderful. Yeah, eager to hear about everything that you have done and learned after the implementation. Yeah. Okay, great. So we're with too many of us to check in with everybody, but I invite our audience to share in the chat view shortly where you're from and what brought you here. Just a short sentence to get some sense of our audience today. Where are you from? What brought you here? We've got something from Estonia, interested in Holacracy. Lage Vuursche, nearby in Utrecht. Tokyo, Japan, practicing Holacracy. Wonderful. All right, great. So while the others are checking in the chat, we will share the video. We will share the chat script with all of you if you'd like. Yeah, let's dive in. And here's how we're planning to do it. First, Joris and I will have a short conversation, and then there's plenty of space for Q&A. Okay. So Joris, on that subject of freedom and holacracy, what are you most proud of at Luscii at the moment?
Yeah, I think all the things that we've been doing so far ultimately came together in the 4-day work week that we now have for everyone. So we used to be a company where most people would work 5 days and some people would work maybe part-time 4 days. And a year ago now we said we decided to give everybody a 4-day work week with full-time pay. And that's not 4 times 10 or 4 times 9. That's just 32 hours a week. Friday is off by default, and yeah, and I don't know. I'm really happy that we did that, and it's working really well. I'm quite proud of it as well. It felt like a bold step back then.
Yeah, it is. How is it even possible? How can you do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not very hard to do, right? You could just do that if you want to do that. I think the main concern that people have is around productivity. And we noticed also from conversations with other companies and from some research that productivity doesn't necessarily suffer if you go to a 4-day work week, especially for roles for specific types of roles that also benefit from creativity and knowledge work and stuff like that, right? Which most of the roles in our company are. So we decided to do an experiment, and so we decided to do it for 3 months, and kind of do a measurement, try to do a measurement beforehand and afterwards, also an engagement survey and these kinds of things, and see how people would feel about it and how we as a company would see what changed. And people really liked it, which is not a surprise, I guess. But we also didn't see any negative effects on productivity or results or output. In many cases, it's actually improved, and in other cases, it just stayed the same. So it was also quite an obvious choice to just go ahead and implement it permanently.
Wow, super interesting. And I love it that you said we started with an experiment. Self-organization and holacracy is all about doing experiments. So yeah, great. And you said we decided to do that. Could you be more specific? Because I learned that in holacracy, we doesn't do anything, right? So who decided this, and how did that happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. Now, so we have a role that is responsible for, let's say, our HR policy. We call it the People Handbook author. And back then, I think I was filling that role. And that role can actually really decide on these kinds of policies. And if they have a financial impact, then the role must also get approval from another role called the treasurer. So in this case, there was one challenge, which was for the people that were already working 4 days a week. Because we would have to start paying them 20% more, or 20, because we were going to pay them a full-time salary, right? And so that was a financial challenge that I had to arrange with the treasurer to see if that was actually possible and how that would impact us. And that was okay. And then I checked in with some people because it felt like a big decision, just to see if they would support it or not. But in the end, I could have probably done without that. But yeah, it felt necessary for me to do that.
Cool. So it was safe enough to try, right?
But it was safe enough to try, and it was very clear it was an experiment of 3 months in the beginning. So that was definitely what was making it safer. But we also said very clearly from the beginning, if this is the outcome, if we don't see reduction in productivity, if people are happy and engagement increases or improves, then we'll make it a permanent thing.
Wonderful. And what are the most important benefits that you're having from this?
Yeah, I think in general we see a very high employee engagement. People are very motivated. There's a very little turnover. That was already the case beforehand, but it increased even further, I would say. there's very little sick leave. I mean, we still have cases of sick leave, but it's also reduced. More informally, I would say, I think it helps taking this extra day off with creativity and new ideas and things like that. One of the things that triggered me originally to start doing it was that I noticed that I thought that the people that were working 4 days a week were typically the high performers in the company. Kind of triggered me. And these people typically worked 4 days because they were spending 1 day with their kids, or they wanted to do something else next to Luscii. But apparently it wasn't a coincidence. It felt to me that probably it's not a coincidence. So that's why we started doing the experiment as well. I think that's what you see now is still as well. And yeah, I don't know that those are some of the benefits, I'd say.
Cool. Are there any downsides? I believe you also you made it also possible by not having an office. Am I right?
Yeah. So I think one of the reasons that we also were able to improve the efficiency in the company is that the year previous we already went to a fully remote company. Yeah, that's just, it saves a lot of time not having being together in an office.
Are people missing seeing each other, having that human contact?
Yeah, it's a fair question. So we do a couple of things to still enable and support that. One thing that we do is that we come together with the whole company once a month. So call it the Luscii Assembly. It's every month. It's a different location, different environment, and a different program. And we try to create time for doing work together, but also doing trainings or workshops or just social activities together during that day. And next to that, we have shared working spaces in Utrecht and Amsterdam where people can go if they want to collaborate together. And there's also room for everyone to, in terms of financial and room and help from our office manager, that role is still there, to help you arrange office space if you want to work with people on location. But not a lot of people actually use that. So it signals to me that people are quite happy working from home. It also depends a little bit, of course, on your situation at home. If you have 2 small kids in a small apartment in the center of Amsterdam, it's a bit harder to work from home than if you live alone and or you have more space. So some of those people, they go to the shared working space more often for us.
Got it. Yeah. So you guys are working distributed, working from home, working a day less a week.
Yeah,
I imagine you must. It's time and resources are always limited, right? So you always need this muscle, this capability to make decisions on what to do and what not. And I imagine this is now even more important. What to do and what not. What's the role of Holacracy in this whole venture? How did it help or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think it started with Holacracy, this whole journey, and without it, this wouldn't have been probably a possibility for us to do all these things. So, of course, Holacracy creates a lot of clarity, and it reduces a lot of overhead in terms of, I would say, communication, because it's so clear who's accountable for what, who should make which decision. We need a lot less discussion or communication around these things. That goes very well. It also, and in that in turn, enabled us to become more of an asynchronous company. So we reduced our meeting load a lot, I would say. And a lot of the things we do go over Slack and Loom these days. It doesn't mean that I don't have any meetings anymore. I mean, I still have some meetings during the week. But it's typically 2 half days are meetings for me. And I have roles that might typically have to talk to a lot of people, but I do that a lot of that asynchronously these days. Holacracy also helped a lot in creating clarity around purpose and strategy, which again is also very important in pointing everyone in the right direction. So yeah,
Great.
for all these things,
Great.
Holacracy has been very instrumental.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
it that you say from your experience that now after 4 years of practicing Holacracy, it's not about meetings. One of the benefits you say is having less meetings, and this is so interesting because I'm not sure if there are any newbies in the audience that are just starting their Holacracy practice, and if there are, I can totally imagine that these people feel, oh, wait a minute, Holacracy, so many meetings. Right. So
All right.
I love it
No,
that you
so
say,
yeah,
yeah.
so the tactical meeting, we rarely have tacticals, and the tactical meeting for me is really a good way to get to learn Holacracy. But
Mm,
once you know how to use Holacracy, then you don't really need the meeting anymore because you realize that you can do most of the things that you need outside the meeting anyway.
excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
And 4 years ago, or even now, does everybody like Holacracy, or is it for everybody, or what's your experience?
Yeah, no. So when we started with Holacracy, there were definitely some people who left. I think about back then we were with 30 people and 3 left, so 10% of the company left because they didn't like it. Maybe maybe there were also already things that weren't as clear before we started doing Holacracy that became more clear. Why they wouldn't maybe fit in the company, or their roles became more clear, and their position in the company became more clear. But so we said goodbye to 3 people, and right now I think a very important part of keeping Holacracy intact and our culture intact is the selection process, right? The recruitment process, where we put a lot of time and emphasis on really making sure that this fits, because it's definitely not for everyone. I think there's also lots of people who won't like to work in a holacratic organization, which is fine. We just want to avoid those people joining us because that wouldn't work for both parties.
Yeah, so please tell more about that selection process. What do you do? How do you select?
So we started using introduction days
Hmm.
a year ago. So that's a day where, let's say we have a situation that we have 3 or 4 vacancies. Then we try to find interested people via LinkedIn mostly, and organize an introduction day. And there we invite 30 people to come and get to know Luscii, and we get to know them. So it's a full day where we talk about our company and how we work and our culture, and also a day where we get to see them present and collaborate, and just have a beer afterwards, so that we can really get a bit of a feeling and a sense of would this be a good fit or not.
Yeah, I'm curious. What are the specific things that you look for to make sure that people fit in, also with your Holacracy practice?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is locus of control. So, do people believe that they are in control of their lives and what happens to them, or do they really believe that things just happen to them and there's nothing they can do about that? One of the interview questions I always use, which has helped me a lot, is, "Are you a lucky person?" Because it kind of signals, if they say yes, then it kind of signals a positive attitude, but it also signals whether or not they have any control over their lives and their accomplishments, or whether it's just happened to them. So this locus of control, I think, is very important. And if that's an external locus of control, then it's very hard to change that, in my experience. And we've seen it especially with people from other cultures. That tend to have a more external locus of control, but that's a good thing to check beforehand.
Interesting.
That's definitely something we check.
Yeah. All right. So you mentioned the 4-day work week as a wonderful example of freedom at work. Any other examples?
I mean, yeah. So it seems like we're taking a step every year. So the year before we took the remote office, and people are now working also anywhere they want to work. So it could also be they are skiing in the Alps, during the morning, and then in the afternoon when it's raining, and in the evening they're working. So they can work, whenever they prefer, as long as it works for their team. We've recently introduced unlimited holidays policy. It's not really unlimited, but at least it's undefined how many holidays you have.
How does that work?
It just means that we think you're responsible for deciding how much and when you feel like you want to go or need to go on holidays. And there's not a fixed 5-week holiday period anymore that we had before. And this is just the first year, so it's really also seeing how that goes. In the beginning, people were quite skeptical about it because they didn't feel comfortable taking holidays. So one of the things that we did is we really asked the more senior people to just go on a lot of holidays as an example, by setting an example, and we're shouting it everywhere that I'm going away for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And I'm seeing now, which I really like, that people are starting to take responsibility for their work being finished so they can go on holiday. So for instance, we work in 6-week cycles with our software development teams, and this week is the last week of the cycle, but one of the developers wanted to go on holiday actually starting this week. And so he said, is it okay if I make sure that the work is done, that I go on holiday? And I said, you don't have to ask me. And then he worked on Pentecost and Ascension Day, which are public holidays in the Netherlands normally, just to make sure that he gets the work of the cycle done, and then he went on holiday. And this just creates an extra, again, layer of responsibility and freedom that people can choose to use to organize their work and their time the way they like. So I think that's really powerful.
Cool.
Yeah. And of course, there is the risk that people don't go on holiday enough. So we do carefully monitor that, and we do also tell people to go on holiday if they don't go, because that's kind of the risks that we see as well.
Yeah, and who's we? Who tells the people to go on holiday?
Yeah, there's a role, and I don't know the name exactly, but there's a role that monitors that.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So just for the audience, I asked Joris about who's we, who's doing it when you say we are doing that. So in Holacracy, all the work gets distributed to clear roles, so everybody knows exactly who is doing what work and what can be expected. Great. So Joris is sharing a screen here. So what are we looking at?
So here you see our tool called Glassfrog that some of you probably know. And this is our organizational structure. So every small green circle here is a role. We have a lot of roles, as you can see, and then they're further organized into circles. So we have a compliance circle, very important for us in the medical software world, an engineering circle, we have a medical program circle, we have a people circle that's basically our HR department. And it's actually quite big. So we have, again, sub-circles there, one for culture, one for performance and compensation, one for personal development, and one for recruitment and onboarding. And I think the role that I couldn't find the name of was the help buddy in this case. That also tracks whether people are taking enough time off.
Cool.
And I mentioned the people handbook author already in the beginning of the talk, but yeah, you can see it's lots of different small roles that do things.
Wonderful. So on a different matter, when I, as a Holacracy coach, reflect on this theme of freedom and Holacracy, I often see individual people being super enthusiastic about the autonomy they get, the freedom they have within their roles. Often that happens at the cost of being aligned to the collective, right? So it's, in other words, for them, it's often either having a lot of autonomy and freedom or aligned to the whole that they're part of. Is that something you encounter at Luscii as well, at any time? Is that even an issue?
It's not that much of an issue for us because, and I think one of the things that makes us maybe different than other organizations, I don't know, is we are very purpose driven, and People that join us, they also join us specifically often because they have a certain passion for healthcare and they really want to contribute there. So we are using our purpose very explicitly and very often to say, is this contributing to our purpose or not? We set our basically all the decisions that we make, we try to identify if it contributes to purpose or not. And that helps a lot. And we also track and measure our purpose. I can share my screen again. So here you see, for instance, the login page of our product. And our purpose is creating space for care, and we measure that in time. And right now we are at 43 years of space for care that we've created. And this is very visible. This is for our users, but these things are also very visible inside the company. And when we do things, we try to estimate how much extra space for care it's going to create. So I think having that purpose and having it so explicitly everywhere really helps to align. And next to that, we have the strategy for the company and for the subcircles as well. That further helps with prioritization and making the right trade-offs in that. But Great. I think the purpose is the main driver for the alignment.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. So Luscii has this strong purpose, and from that purpose, you asked yourselves, okay, if we're serious about that purpose, then what's the work? And from there, the roles emerged, right? Yeah. And these roles describe the work very clearly with accountabilities.
Yeah, and now it sounds very black and white. I mean, it's evolved in that way. The purpose wasn't so clear when we started, and it has become more clear over time as well.
Yeah. Like anything, it's the purpose statement is an iterative process as well. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. I'm wondering, because it's so super nice and helpful to have clear roles and clarity on who is accountable for what. But what if people are, disappointed in others? How are you keeping each other accountable? That's often a hard thing, right? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think it's also still a hard thing within our organization, or at least a challenge, and we've tried to manage it in different ways. So we don't have managers anymore, right? I think that's we don't have a role explicitly tasked to keep others accountable. We basically share that work with each other. So everyone is involved in keeping others accountable. That's at least what we hope. And we have kind of a set of different processes that contribute to that, and it goes from very informal to very formal. So it starts with an app in Slack called Matter, where you can give each other positive feedback for things that you like, that you saw other people do. Then we have things like personal retrospectives that we organize to get feedback and create improvement plans for personal development. We have a compensation process, which becomes a bit more formal, where we actually have a very structured matrix of 160 different types of behaviors that we evaluate for everyone.
Wow.
And then ultimately we have what we call an employment review process. So it's the process that if things really don't go well, then it's a process for firing someone.
Yeah. And what are the things that you have done at Luscii to help /support, encourage that difficult habit of keeping each other accountable? Because if you were not a manager, in the past, it might be a very difficult thing to start with, right? To keep your colleagues accountable for what they agree to do, given the role they have. So I remember we did not go into that part in depth while implementing Holacracy. What have you done later? Any trainings or tips there?
No. So we are typically a company with a lot of let's say green people. If you know the insights profile, so a lot of people are not very comfortable giving negative feedback to each other, at least not naturally. So we've over the last year we've spent quite some of the Luscii assemblies, so these days that we come together, on trainings, on giving feedback, on trainings on how to deal with certain tensions that you have with other people, what do you do and how do you communicate then? And I think that has helped. It's not, I think, yet at the level that we want it to be, but it does. But we also don't really know very well what else to do to improve that further.
Yeah.
So that's still a bit of a challenge for us, I think.
Yeah. I see that at many teams and organizations that we are supporting, and even in our own team. Yeah, that psychological safety to keep each other accountable or to share whatever. It's so super important. And Holacracy is not directly helping in that matter. You need extra tools over there. So if our audience is having tips on that matter,
it would be great.
Yeah, we are all welcoming them. Yeah.
Maybe in that light, I can also share this one quickly. So this Culture App is the tool we use for evaluating employee engagement. And actually our lowest scoring factor is feedback and recognition. It's not terrible, but it should be higher. So that's definitely where we want to improve.
Great. Yeah. So Joris, I want to go to the questions from our audience in a minute, but before we do so, you guys also published a very cool book recently, right? Called Green On. It's only available in Dutch or English too?
No, it's also available in English. Thanks for asking, Koen. We wrote a book about our experiences with Holacracy and our ways of working together with 3 special forces operators from the Dutch Corps Commando Trooper from the Dutch Army. I was a bit hesitant to do that up in the beginning, but one of my friends and the co-founder of Luscii got in touch with them, and he's very much a fan of this branch of the military. And so I got to know them, and I was actually very, very surprised. I was very prejudiced. I don't know about them, but they were not at all what I expected them to be. So a lot of the things that we do with Holacracy, they do as well. They just call things differently, and so we started to combine their stories with our learnings. And we wrote a book about that. It's called Green On. It's available on Amazon, either for your Kindle or in print in English, and it's available in Dutch in all the major outlets for books.
Cool. Yeah. And I've seen the influence of your Holacracy practice in the book. Wonderful. I'm curious, what are the most, important new ideas or additional ideas that are in the book, additional to, let's say, the Holacracy practice? What stands out for you?
Yeah, so for me, I think the first chapter in the book is really about Holacracy. We don't call things Holacracy there, but it's about working with roles and working with a concept that we call the minimum viable group, which isn't explicitly in Holacracy, but I think implicitly might be there. But later on, we talk a lot more about kind of the human side of things as well, which I'm often missing in Holacracy, how you create trust and how you select for the right people. And for instance, the idea of the introduction days came from the special forces, because that's what they do. So and I think there's lots of those things in there that are very much additions onto Holacracy.
Great, interesting. Yeah, so great. So Joris, if people in the audience feel inspired by your story so far and want to have more of these things in their own organization, where, in your opinion, should they start?
Well, read the book, obviously. No, but seriously, I think if you really want to start doing Holacracy, for us, it was a great help having a coach, in this case, Koen. Without a good coach, it's quite complex to learn, I think, and it's really a behavior change and a mindset change. So I think without coach, it's quite hard. I don't know for sure, but we didn't try it without. But I would definitely try to find somebody who can really guide you and help you to implement Holacracy. So that's where I would probably start if I would have to do it again in another organization.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Thanks for that. So let's move to our audience. We have received a couple of questions, interesting questions from you already via your sign-on process for this meetup. But I'd like to ask now, are there any questions alive for you now? If yes, feel free to raise your hand and we can open the conversation. And if not, let's go to some questions that we have received. So Christopher, not sure, is Christopher here? Christopher Suller. If you are, Christopher, great that you're here. We know each other. Christopher asked, I'd like to see how Joris' roles interact and how governance is put together, culture, compensation, absences. Anything you can comment on that?
It's quite a big question.
It is.
One thing that I can offer is our Glassfrog is open and our handbook as well. Let me quickly share my screen. So this is a good starting point for understanding how we work. So we call our handbook is called We at Luscii. It's public. It's a Notion page, and here you can read a lot about our process, very concrete stuff, how we do feedback and performance and compensation, for instance, but also about our culture. We were inspired by Energized.org, for those of you who know that, so you'll recognize some things from that. And we started to make our culture as explicit as we could be in terms of behaviors. Cool. So this is something everyone can read. I'll share the link with the group afterwards.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Let's go to the next one. Dan is asking, what is the biggest learning about interpersonal dynamics that you can share with us outside of coordinating the work with Holacracy? The biggest learning about interpersonal dynamics.
I don't know. I don't have a really great answer here. I think there's lots of things besides, Holacracy and the roles. Everybody is just, we are all still people, and there's lots of interpersonal dynamics, obviously. And I think what we do with the Luscii assemblies and creating social events is very important. Really being together and in a social way really helps there. It creates trust also. But I don't know if those are, for me, they're kind of obvious. You don't have to forget those things when you start doing Holacracy. Let's put it like that.
Absolutely.
Because I think that will hurt the organization a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, maybe I can comment on it as well, because we're practicing Holacracy, of course, at Energized as well. So Holacracy differentiates between the role and the person, the role and the soul. And we show up as roles in service of our purpose. That's all great, provided that the interpersonal dynamics between the people is okay. Like, anything can happen in a team of people where someone gets triggered and suddenly, for whatever reason, and this is the language that we use, for whatever reason, suddenly the energy in the team of people is not available for the task. And if that happens, if that interpersonal dynamics happens, then we say, oh, okay, let's press pause. Let's not work on the task. Let's clarify what is happening here between us. And we have a very interesting tool set for that. It's called system-centered training that we use as an additional tool next to Holacracy. So Holacracy is for our roles. System-centered training is for the interpersonal dynamics between people, to create that psychological safety, to do those interventions so that quickly the energy is available for the task again. Yeah.
Nice.
Let's see. Here's an interesting question from Isabel. What do you think will Holacracy look like in 10 or 20 years from today? Any thoughts?
I have no idea. Probably probably very similar. I don't know. I hope it's very similar. It works really well for me right now, and for Luscii, it works really well. So I wouldn't change too much if that would be the question. Maybe it can be simpler. I hope it would be simpler, which would make it a lot more powerful. Probably. I don't know how to make it simpler without losing features, but I would love to see it a bit simpler to learn, at least.
Yeah, simpler to learn, to adopt the tool set.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How long did that take? How long did that take in your organization?
Well, I think we did a process with you, Koen, of about 3 months. And I think that was a good, and I think we were sufficiently mature to practice on our own. But I don't think we stopped learning there, right? So it's still a developing process, and especially with new people joining the organization, they have to also learn again and get into it, and this takes time. So it's still ongoing. I would say the practice is never finished.
Yeah. And you see, the Holacracy toolset is constantly evolving. We recently got to version 5, right? So this is not the Holacracy toolset is also not a product of intelligent design. It's evolution. So it's constantly evolving, currently at version 5, which, by the way, is much more simpler to read, at least. Yeah. We've got a question from Justine. Justine, you can unmute yourself. And
Hi. Yeah, I have a question about your type of organization. And why do you think it's fit for this type of organizational design?
So why our type of organization is fit for Holacracy, if I understand your question correctly. Yeah, so we are with about 50 people. Everybody is quite well educated, I think. Average age is between 25 and 40 somewhere. There's not many people over 45. I don't know if this is relevant, but I'm just giving you some of the information about our organization so you can kind of get a feeling for what type of organization we are. I find it very hard to say where Holacracy will or will not work, because I do think that it can work probably in many different types of organizations. It's probably not necessary if you're really, really small, because then it's a lot of overhead. So let's say you're a startup with 3 or 4 or 5 people, then I probably would not advocate using Holacracy from the start, because you probably don't need that kind of clarity if you're just with a couple of people. But after that, I think it really helps to have the clarity. What I find very hard to judge is whether it scales with size. I really don't know, and probably other people that have experience with that would be much better able to answer that question. So I've not seen Holacracy in a large organization of 1,000 people or even more. So I don't know if that works or not. But for our size, it works really well. It's still we have about 400 roles, and it's also coming to a point that in the beginning I knew all the roles, and I knew what was going on, and now sometimes I discover new roles now, and then people are saying, "Oh, but the storyteller should be here," and I'm like, "What is the storyteller?" And that's very nice. That's very fun, actually. So we've reached a certain scale where you cannot know and understand all the roles anymore, and you don't have to. That's also nice to see that at least in that scale it also still works, and there's no issue. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, it does. But I was also more interested in this is a little bit about your organization or the structure, but I was more interested also in the activities you do. So the software development for healthcare.
I think it's not really it works very well for that, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't work for other types of activities as well. So I don't think there's any necessarily any constraints on what types of activities you can use Holacracy for.
I can chip in here,
yeah,
Joris, from my experience, because we get that question very often. Does it work for any type of organization, any type of activities? I've seen it fail very often, interestingly, in healthcare. And the most important reason was that in most healthcare organizations that I've seen so far, where there was interest to implement Holacracy, was the situation there was that the people working there need to be 100% available with their hands on the bed, let's say, to help the patient. They wanted to get rid of managers, for example. And if you introduce self-organization, people do need time and space to self-manage. So if your organization, if your business model requires that your employees cannot spend any time away, for example, in this example, away from the bed, then it will not fly, right? The people need some time and some space and some energy to actually do the self-managing, because the managing part still needs to happen, only in a complete different way. It's now distributed. So that's maybe the only situation where I've seen it fail. Yeah,
I would argue that the case of Buurtzorg from Jos de Blok is a great counterexample to that. But
and they found it a different business model, of course, where that is possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Great. But we've also actually tried it with customers. So our customers are hospitals, and we've tried to implement or help them organize themselves in a holacratic way. And we've also failed always. But it wasn't necessarily to do with the reason that Koen gave. In our case, it was definitely culture related. So it was very difficult to kind of change the top-down culture where the specialist, the cardiologist, is just the boss, and you have to listen to him or her. And that's it. We couldn't change that.
I can second that. When adopting Holacracy, you are now not just the leader or just the follower. You have to switch between both. In your roles, you are the leader, but for all the other roles, you are the follower. So you need that agility to shift between these two perspectives. We got a question from Niels. Niels, please step in.
Yes, thanks. Hi, Joris. Can you explain some more about the 160 traits you were talking about? It's about the evaluation. Is it based on behavior, skill sets, and let's say, holy shit, 160 traits? How do you... Some companies have enough difficulties only evaluating 5 traits. So let's talk about 160. So I'm curious how you handle this process within your company, and also how you gather the information to set a objective evaluation also.
So I'm sharing my screen, I think, right? So here you see a snapshot of what we call the matrix. And the matrix is basically 6 profiles. Starts with the learner, to specialist, the pilot, the change maker or professor, the strategist, and the visionary. On the columns, and on the rows, you see what you call traits. So different types of, let's say, behavior or skills that you have. These were taken from several different places, and this matrix keeps evolving, and we are constantly, let's say, fine-tuning it every so often. But there's basically a section around skills and knowledge, a section around impact, and a section around culture fit. And we evaluate those with 4 people. There's always the person themselves, which is called the 1 in this sheet. Then we have 3 others. So typically a peer, a lead link, or the lead link. If there's like a main lead link, or one of them, and then somebody chosen by the lead to do the evaluation. And for every statement, we say check or no check, basically. So it's either 0 or 1.
Yeah.
Everybody fills it in independently. And then together with those 4 people, we go through this sheet and we discuss the cells where there's misalignment. And typically the person on the review gives examples of why they might think that that they actually are doing that or have shown to do that. And then the other people, they can decide to change their score or not. And at the end, for every level, there rolls out, let's say, percentage of how many checks you have for that level. And that goes into a formula that calculates your salary.
Yeah.
And that's it, basically.
Yeah, kind of. Did you get some inspiration also from the Barda model?
That was one source of inspiration as well. Indeed. Yeah. So it looks a little bit like that.
Barda, so I understand the process. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Did that help, Niels?
Yeah. Cheers.
Cool. Any other questions from our live audience? If not, let's go to a question from Jeroen. How does firing work in an environment without managers? How does firing work?
Yeah, so it's a good question. This is kind of taken from one of the standard apps from Holacracy 1, I think. Mm-hmm. We call it the employment review process. And it's a policy in Glassfrog. Everyone can make proposals to change it or adapt it, which I think is very important, because by not doing that, you kind of implicitly agree that you might become the subject of this process as well at some point. So no role may decide to terminate the employment contract agreement of any employee except after 3 consecutive employment reviews with at least 10 weeks in between the first and the final review. And then there's these steps that we go through, ultimately voting on the question, knowing what you know now, would you invite this person into the organization again, if you would have that choice with their current contract terms. And if that's a majority no, 3 times in a row, with 20 weeks in between, that basically means the end of the employment contract.
Great.
Happens very rarely, but yeah.
So it's a very explicit process where
yes,
everybody can see what is and is not allowed. Yeah, and just to give some subtitles to the audience, what you see here is not Holacracy. Holacracy is not the form. Holacracy is the process, the tool set to create these outcomes. So you can create any outcome using Holacracy, and this is the outcome that Luscii has created for their employment review process. Holacracy doesn't prescribe that. It's the process to come to these agreements, evolutionary, tension-driven. So if anyone at Luscii thinks or knows that this could or should be even better, they can come up with a proposal to make a change. Yeah. Henk, you've got a question.
Yes, it's also a question that I put in the chat, which is based on the topic that you mentioned, Joris, about giving feedback and having recognition. So this is something that I really recognize within our own company as well. So could you share more on what your initiatives will be regarding that subject?
Yeah, let me think a little bit on that. So it's mostly, I think, about stimulating people to do it more, especially when it comes to more the positive feedback side and the recognition side, because there's still, I think, quite a large group in the organization that expects it to come from the senior people. Let's put it like that. And I think that breaking that mindset will help a lot to have more recognition in general. And then initiatives to do that. Yeah, it's very much having discussions on the culture. So we started doing that now sometimes with an external facilitator as well, where we sit down with a group of 8 or 10 people, and we have this culture document, and we have some challenges. We do this engagement survey that you saw, and we take that as input to discuss some of the feedback that comes out of that, and then see how people really feel and think about that, and then discuss those types of ideas that people have. They say, okay, I don't think I get enough recognition for my work. Then we turn it around. Okay, do you feel like you give enough recognition for others' work? And those discussions, I think, are something that sometimes help a lot in my experience over the last year. So that's one thing that we do. And the other thing that we've done, and it's a bit hit and miss, is external trainings. So sometimes it happens that we have a very good trainer or a very good company that guides that, and everybody is super excited about the results, and it's very valuable. And sometimes it's also a bit of a miss in the sense that maybe they don't understand Holacracy correctly, or they actually confuse things a lot. So that's still a bit of a search, I would say. Does it help?
Yes, it does. I think it's basically the same that we're dealing with. So
right,
it's good to know that you're struggling as well. That's what I mean.
Indeed, and that's also, I don't have a great answer or a silver bullet for that.
Cool.
But if somebody has, then I'd love to hear.
Cool. We got only a few minutes left, and there's a question from Martin. Martin.
Yes, you've just been showing us sort of the employment review process and employment contracts. Have you been looking at relational agreements as a supplement for employment contracts? Because if I understand it right, an employment contract still is something hierarchical with regards to that it sort of legally forces you to do some things. And then sort of you move into a holacratic environment where you have a completely different way to choosing things. And I'm not sure, but maybe relational agreements may be a good way to complement this, like sort of to make a link between individuals and their needs and them to become role fillers.
So the short answer is no. I think we have the majority of people are on let's say an employment contract in Luscii, but there's about 20% of people are more on a freelance contractor basis working with us, and then the employment review process also, we're still following it for them as well, actually, but we wouldn't legally have to, and often it becomes a bit of a shorter process because they also realize maybe that the fit isn't there. But not everybody who wants to join us is comfortable working as a contractor or as a freelancer with the uncertainty that comes with that. So that's why most people still would like an employment contract in a traditional way. But I don't know exactly when you say relational contracts, right, or additions to the contract. I don't know much about those actually, so I wouldn't know the pros and cons for those. But it sounds interesting actually.
Yeah, and I think, Martin, you're referring to the relational agreements that version 5 of the Holacracy Constitution introduced. So, strictly speaking, you guys adopted version 4.1, and this is all about how do roles work with each other. And version 5 introduces this concept of relational agreements, of what do people expect from other people, or what does the organization expect from people, or what do people expect from their organization. So not just the expectations between roles. So that's an interesting thing to look into maybe one day. I'm looking at the time, and time flies. Joris, if people have follow-up questions, can they contact you? And if yes, how?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to share a couple of links where you can see for yourself our handbook and our Glassfrog and things like that. If you want to get in touch, you can do so at joris@luscii.com. That's my email address. That's the easiest way to ask follow-up questions if you want to know more. And I think that's it. Yeah.
Great, great. Yep. And if you have any questions regarding adopting Holacracy, learning about this, implementing it, you can always contact me at Energized, Koen at Energized.org. I quickly like to plug a few things. We've got, for people who are totally new at this and like to get more informed, we've got a series of introduction workshops. They are in Dutch. Feel free to connect or check out our website for that. In November, again in Dutch, we are doing an in-depth Holacracy training, 14th up to the 18th of November. The in-depth official Holacracy practitioner training in Dutch. Just wanted to plug that. Thanks everybody for your participation. I'm inviting you to share your checkout in the chat. How are you leaving? So that you can leave this meetup okay. Thanks everybody, and a big thanks to Joris.
All right, thanks everyone for your attention. Really happy to answer all your questions. Bye-bye.